Chapter 6. Morrigan appeared in the throne room doorway with her arms wrapped protectively around two small figures. Arya and Lyra, Seraphina's remaining daughters. The healer's weathered face was etched with grim urgency as she hurried forward, the little girls clinging to her skirts with wide, frightened eyes. "Your Majesty," Morrigan called out, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "These children have something you need to hear." Marcus's triumphant expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. "What are they doing here? Children have no business in." "They were hiding in the corridor," Morrigan interrupted, her sharp gaze fixed on the beta, "listening to everything. And they heard something that changes the situation considerably." Seraphina's heart clenched as she looked at her daughters. Arya, barely 3 years old but already showing signs of the intelligence she'd inherited, stood straighter than any child should have to. Beside her, 2-year-old Lyra clutched a small stuffed wolf, her green eyes, so like her mother's, bright with unshed tears. "Mama," Arya whispered, her small voice carrying clearly in the vast throne room. "Don't go with the bad man." "I have to, sweetheart," Seraphina said, kneeling down despite the pain shooting through her shoulder. "To protect Luna." "But he's lying," Arya said with the devastating honesty of childhood. "He told his men to hurt all of us. Even after you go with him." The words hit the throne room like a physical blow. Marcus's face went white, then flushed red with panic. "Children don't understand what they hear. They make up stories." "I heard him," Lyra piped up, her voice small but determined. "On the talking box. He said to kill us all once Mama comes back." Demon was moving before the words fully registered, crossing the space between them with deadly grace. His silver eyes blazed with a fury that made the very air crackle, and when he spoke, his voice carried the promise of violence. "Is that true, Marcus? Are you planning to murder innocent children?" "Of course not." Marcus backed toward the wall, his carefully constructed facade crumbling completely. "They're children. They misunderstood. Children's ears are often sharper than adults give them credit for," Morrigan observed coldly. She moved to stand beside Demon, her healer's instincts replaced by something far more dangerous. "And these little ones have learned to listen carefully when dangerous men are speaking. It's a survival skill their mother taught them." The visiting dignitaries and pack elders were backing away now, their faces reflecting horror and disgust. Whatever political sympathy Marcus might have commanded was evaporating in the face of child murder accusations. "You never intended to honor your bargain," Demon said, his voice soft with lethal rage. "You were going to take Seraphina and kill her daughters anyway." "They're liabilities," Marcus snarled, all pretense abandoned. "Witnesses to what she claims happened. Better they die now than spread lies later." The admission hung in the air like poison. Even his own legal counsel took a step back, clearly unwilling to be associated with child murder. The pack elders who had come to support traditional values looked sick, their faith in Marcus's righteousness shattered. But Marcus wasn't finished. His hand moved to his belt, pulling out a silver blade that gleamed with unnatural light. Enhancement runes were carved along its length, illegal modifications that would make even a minor cut potentially fatal. "It doesn't matter now," he said, his pale eyes wild with desperation. "I'll take what's mine and deal with the consequences later." He lunged toward Seraphina, the enhanced blade aimed at her heart. But Demon was faster, intercepting the attack with his bare hands. The silver burned his palms, but he didn't flinch as he twisted the weapon away from Marcus and sent it clattering across the marble floor. "Guards!" Demon roared, but Marcus had already activated another device on his belt. Smoke bombs detonated throughout the throne room, filling the air with thick, choking clouds that made it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. Shouts of alarm echoed off the stone walls as people stumbled blindly, trying to find their way through the chaos. "Seraphina!" Demon's voice cut through the confusion, but she couldn't see him through the smoke. Then Marcus's arm was around her throat, dragging her backward toward what she hoped was a wall, but could be anything in the disorienting haze. The silver collar around her neck burned where his enhanced strength gripped it, and she could smell the acrid scent of chemical enhancement on his skin. "Come quietly," he hissed in her ear, "or I'll kill everyone in this room, starting with your precious daughters." She went limp in his arms, allowing him to drag her through what must have been a hidden passage behind one of the tapestries. The throne room had been built with multiple escape routes for the royal family, but Marcus had clearly studied the castle's layout well enough to use them for his own purposes. The passage was narrow and dark, carved from the living rock of the mountain. Marcus pulled her along ruthlessly, his enhanced grip leaving bruises on her arms as they navigated the winding route. Behind them, she could hear the sounds of pursuit beginning. Demon's voice shouting orders, the clatter of armored boots on stone. But Marcus had planned well. The passage split in multiple directions, creating a maze that could confuse pursuers for precious minutes. And minutes were all he needed to reach whatever extraction point he'd arranged. They emerged into the castle's lower courtyard, where a group of armed men waited with horses. Marcus's personal guard, all of them bearing the telltale signs of chemical enhancement. Enlarged muscle mass, eyes that reflected light like an animal's, and the faint acrid scent that marked forbidden drug use. "Is the child secure?" Marcus demanded as he hauled Serafina toward the horses. "Safe and waiting, my lord," the lead guard replied. "Just as you ordered." More lies, Serafina realized with sick certainty. Luna was probably already dead, her tiny body disposed of to eliminate evidence. The knowledge should have broken her, but instead it filled her with a rage that burned brighter than silver fire. As Marcus lifted her toward one of the horses, she made her choice. Serafina drove her elbow backward with all her strength, connecting with Marcus's ribs hard enough to crack bone. His grip loosened for just an instant, and she twisted away, putting distance between them as she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Demon! The lower courtyard! They have Luna in the—" Marcus's backhanded blow sent her sprawling across the cobblestones, her injured shoulder screaming in protest. Blood filled her mouth from her split lip, but she kept screaming until one of the enhanced guards clamped a hand over her face. It was enough. She could hear the commotion from inside the castle changing direction, guards racing toward their location. Marcus cursed viciously as he realized his careful escape plan was collapsing. "Change of plans," he snarled to his men. "We make our stand here. My lord, the king's guards are about to learn what enhanced wolves can do in close combat," Marcus finished with a savage grin. "We kill them all, take the woman, and disappear into the mountains. The child dies either way." The castle doors burst open, and Demon appeared with a dozen of his personal guard. But he stopped cold when he saw the odds: Marcus and 6 enhanced fighters against normal wolves, even well-trained ones. Chemical enhancement was illegal precisely because it made users nearly unstoppable in combat. "Let her go, Marcus," Demon called out, his voice carrying absolute authority despite the tactical disadvantage. "This ends here." "You're right," Marcus replied with a cold smile. "It does end here. With your death, and my reclaiming what belongs to me." He began to shift, his form blurring and expanding as his wolf took over. But this wasn't the normal transformation Serafina had seen countless times. Marcus's wolf form was huge, easily twice the size it should have been, with muscles that bulged unnaturally and eyes that glowed with chemical fire. His men followed suit, 6 enhanced monsters that looked like something from a nightmare rather than natural werewolves. They surrounded Demon and his guards, snarling with voices that carried the distorted echoes of drug-induced madness. "Illegal enhancement," Captain Thorne observed grimly, his sword already in his hand. "They're chemically modified." "I know," Demon replied, his own form beginning to shift. "Doesn't change what we have to do. But it changed everything about their chances of survival. Enhanced wolves were stronger, faster, and felt no pain. They fought with berserker fury until they were literally torn apart, making them nearly impossible to stop without massive numerical superiority. The battle erupted with savage violence. Marcus's enhanced pack fell on Demon's guards like monsters from the depths of hell, their claws and fangs tearing through armor and flesh with horrifying ease. The courtyard echoed with screams of pain and rage as the two forces clashed. Demon fought like a man possessed, his natural alpha strength allowing him to hold his own against the enhanced wolves. But even he couldn't be everywhere at once, and his guards were falling one by one to enemies that should have been impossible to defeat. Serafina watched in horror as Captain Thorne went down under 2 enhanced wolves, his sword arm nearly severed before he managed to drive his blade through one attacker's heart. The man who had helped protect her was dying because of her, and the knowledge burned like acid in her chest. "Stop!" she screamed, struggling against the guard who held her. "Please, just stop." But the battle raged on, impossible odds made worse by chemical enhancement and desperate fury. Demon was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his movements slowing as exhaustion and injury took their toll. Around him, his remaining guards fought with the courage of men who knew they were likely to die, but courage alone couldn't overcome the enhanced monsters they faced. Marcus, in his chemically twisted wolf form, stalked toward Demon with predatory satisfaction. His pack was winning, and he could afford to savor the moment when he would tear out his rival's throat and claim final victory. "You should have minded your own business, Your Majesty," Marcus snarled, his voice distorted by enhancement and transformation. "Should have let me keep my property and focused on ruling instead of rutting." Demon's silver wolf form was magnificent, even covered in blood and exhaustion. He stood protectively over Captain Thorne's fallen body, his eyes blazing with defiant fury despite the hopeless odds. "Property?" Demon's voice carried clearly despite his wolf form. "You mean the woman you bought like livestock? The children you planned to murder?" "Mine by right of purchase and conquest," Marcus replied with vicious satisfaction. "Just like I'll own her body when I'm finished killing you." The threat broke something in Demon's restraint. He launched himself at Marcus with desperate fury, but the enhanced beta was ready for him. Claws raked across Demon's ribs, opening wounds that bled freely onto the cobblestones. It was over. Seraphina could see it in the way Demon's movements were slowing, in the triumphant gleam in Marcus's chemical-bright eyes. The man she loved was going to die trying to protect her, and she was helpless to prevent it. "Unless I invoke the right of challenge," she screamed suddenly, her voice cutting through the sounds of battle. Both wolves froze mid-attack, their supernatural hearing picking up her words clearly. Around the courtyard, the fighting slowed as ancient instincts responded to the formal declaration. The right of challenge was one of the oldest laws in werewolf society. The right of any wolf to demand single combat to resolve disputes that threaten pack stability. It superseded all other considerations, binding even enhanced monsters to its ancient rules. The right of challenge for what? Marcus demanded, though he didn't resume his attack on Demon. "For my freedom," Seraphina said, struggling to her feet despite her injuries. "For the truth about what you are and what you've done. Single combat, winner takes all, my life, my children's lives, everything." It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only way to stop the slaughter happening around her. The right of challenge had to be honored, even by someone as corrupt as Marcus. "You can't invoke the right," Marcus snarled. "You're not a warrior." "But I can," Demon interrupted, his silver eyes blazing with sudden understanding. "As her king, I can stand as champion in single combat to determine her fate." The ancient law was clear. Any wolf could demand a champion to fight in their place, and no one could refuse the formal challenge. It would be Demon against Marcus, one-on-one, with everything hanging on the outcome. "Accepted," Marcus said with a savage grin. "But I choose the terms. To the death in wolf form, with no weapons except what nature provided." Enhanced as he was, Marcus was confident of victory. In single combat, his chemical advantages would be overwhelming against even an alpha as strong as Demon. And once he won, he would have legal right to claim everything, Seraphina, her children, even Demon's kingdom if he chose to press the point. "Agreed," Demon said without hesitation. The remaining fighters pulled back, forming a loose circle around the two alphas. Ancient law demanded that all witness the challenge, that no one interfere with its outcome. Even the enhanced wolves stepped aside, their drug-addled minds still bound by instincts older than civilization. Seraphina wanted to scream, to throw herself between them and stop this madness. Demon was already injured and exhausted, while Marcus was enhanced beyond natural limits. It wasn't a fair fight, it was execution disguised as honor. But the law was absolute. Once the challenge was formally accepted, it could only end with death. The two alphas circled each other in the growing dawn light, their wolf forms magnificent and terrible. Demon's silver coat was stained with blood from his wounds, but his eyes burned with unquenchable determination. Across from him, Marcus's enhanced form was a nightmare of unnatural muscle and chemical fury, his pale eyes glowing with drug-induced madness. "When I kill you," Marcus snarled, "I'm going to make her watch. Going to let her see what happens to men who think they can steal what belongs to me." "When I kill you," Demon replied with deadly calm, "she'll finally be free. And your name will be forgotten as the monster who preyed on innocents." They came together in a crash of fur and fangs that echoed off the courtyard walls. Natural strength against chemical enhancement, love against possession, justice against corruption. Everything Seraphina cared about hung in the balance of claws and teeth, decided by ancient law and modern horror. The battle that would determine all their fates had begun. Chapter 7. The courtyard fell silent except for the sound of two wolves circling each other in the pale dawn light. Ancient magic stirred in the air, the kind of primal power that had governed werewolf law for millennia. Once the right of challenge was invoked, the very stones seemed to hold their breath until justice was served. Serafina stood frozen between two of Marcus's remaining guards, silver chains now binding her wrists to prevent any interference. The metal burned against her skin, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony of watching the man she loved prepare to face an impossible enemy. Marcus's enhanced form was a perversion of nature, easily twice the size of a normal wolf, with muscles that bulged unnaturally beneath his pale coat. Chemical enhancement had turned him into something that belonged in nightmares rather than the natural world. His eyes glowed with drug-induced fury, and when he snarled, foam flecked his muzzle. Demon, despite his injuries from the earlier battle, moved with the fluid grace that marked him as a true alpha. His silver coat was matted with blood, and she could see the exhaustion in his movements, but his eyes burned with unquenchable determination. He was outweighed, outmatched, and fighting against supernatural advantages, but he was fighting for love, and that made him dangerous in ways Marcus couldn't comprehend. "Look at him," Marcus taunted, his voice distorted by enhancement chemicals. "Already wounded, already weak. This won't take long." Captain Thorne, propped against the courtyard wall with his arm in a makeshift sling, tried to stand. "Your Majesty, this isn't fair combat. Enhanced wolves shouldn't." "The challenge has been made and accepted," Demon replied, never taking his eyes off Marcus. "Ancient law supersedes all other considerations." But Serafina could see what the others missed. The slight tremor in Demon's left leg where Marcus had caught him with those terrible claws, the way he favored his right side where ribs were likely cracked. He was already operating at diminished capacity against an enemy who felt no pain and possessed superhuman strength. The first clash came without warning. Marcus launched himself forward with impossible speed, his jaws snapping for Demon's throat. Only supernatural reflexes saved the Alpha King as he twisted away, Marcus's fangs barely missing the vital artery. But the enhanced wolf's momentum carried him around in a tight circle, and his massive paw caught Demon across the ribs with bone-crushing force. The silver wolf went down hard, rolling across the cobblestones as blood sprayed from reopened wounds. "Demon!" Serafina's scream echoed off the courtyard walls as he struggled to regain his feet. Marcus was already moving, pressing his advantage with the relentless efficiency of a predator. His claws raked across Demon's shoulder, opening wounds that would have crippled a normal wolf. But somehow, Demon kept moving, kept fighting, even as his blood painted the ancient stones. The battle became a brutal dance of desperation and determination. Demon used every advantage his natural agility could provide, ducking under Marcus's powerful swipes, using the enhanced wolf's massive size against him, striking at joints and pressure points that might slow his chemically altered opponent. But it wasn't enough. For every minor wound Demon managed to inflict, Marcus dealt back damage that should have been fatal. The enhancement drugs made him nearly invincible, able to ignore injuries that would drop a normal wolf. "You're dying slowly," Marcus snarled as he cornered Demon against the courtyard wall. "I could end this quickly, but where's the fun in that? I want her to watch you suffer." Demon's response was to launch himself directly at Marcus's throat, accepting terrible wounds to his flanks in exchange for the chance to sink his fangs into the enhanced wolf's neck. For a moment, hope flared in Serafina's chest. If he could just hold on, if the silver in his bite could counteract the chemicals. But Marcus's enhanced strength allowed him to tear free with a sound like ripping canvas. Blood poured from his throat, but the drugs in his system began healing the wound almost immediately. Within seconds, the gaping tear had closed to angry red marks. "Is that all you have?" Marcus laughed, the sound coming out as a harsh bark. "Pathetic. No wonder she needs a real male to satisfy her." The words were designed to provoke rage, to make Demon fight recklessly. And they worked. The silver wolf threw himself forward with desperate fury, abandoning strategy for pure aggression. It was exactly what Marcus had been waiting for. The enhanced wolf caught Demon mid-leap, his massive jaws closing around the Alpha King's ribs with crushing force. The sound of breaking bones echoed across the courtyard as Marcus lifted Demon off the ground and shook him like a rag doll. "No!" Serafina fought against her chains with desperate strength, the silver burning through to bone as she tried to reach him. "Stop! Please, you're killing him." Marcus released his grip, letting Demon crash to the cobblestones in a spreading pool of blood. The silver wolf tried to rise but collapsed again, his breathing labored and painful. "That's the point," Marcus replied with vicious satisfaction. "He's dying, just like everyone who tries to take what belongs to me." He padded over to where Demon lay broken and bleeding, preparing to deliver the killing blow. His jaws opened wide, revealing fangs that gleamed with chemical enhancement and old blood. Serafina felt something break inside her chest, not physical, but spiritual. The mate bond that had been growing between them for weeks suddenly blazed to life with the force of a supernova. She could feel Demon's pain as if it were her own, could sense his life force flickering like a candle in the wind. "I love you," she whispered, the words carrying clearly in the dawn stillness. "I love you, Demon Blackthorn. With everything I am, everything I have, everything I'll ever be." The confession hit Demon like a physical blow. His silver eyes found hers across the courtyard, and for a moment the pain seemed to leave his face. The mate bond between them pulsed with recognition, with acceptance, with a love that transcended law and circumstance and impossibility. "I love you too," he managed to whisper back, blood frothing on his lips. Marcus's jaws descended toward Demon's exposed throat, but something had changed. The words of love had awakened something primal in the silver wolf, something that went deeper than physical strength or chemical enhancement. At the last possible second, Demon rolled aside, Marcus's fangs closing on empty air. The enhanced wolf's momentum carried him forward, and Demon used that split second to regain his feet. But this was a different Demon than the one who had been losing the battle. The mate bond blazed between him and Serafina now, acknowledged and accepted by both of them. And that bond carried with it power older than pack law, older than civilization itself. The power of true mates united in love and purpose. Serafina felt it too, strength flowing from her into him through their spiritual connection. She poured everything she had into that bond, all her determination, all her fierce maternal protectiveness, all her desperate love for the man fighting for their future. "Take my strength," she whispered, knowing somehow that he could hear her. "Take everything I have and use it to protect our family." The transformation was visible to everyone watching. Demon's wounds were still there, still bleeding, but he moved with renewed power and purpose. His attacks became more precise, more devastating, guided by instincts that seemed to come from beyond the physical realm. Marcus sensed the change and attacked with renewed fury, but now he was fighting not just Demon, but the spiritual bond between true mates. Every blow he landed was cushioned by Serafina's love. Every wound he inflicted was shared and thereby weakened. The enhanced wolf's chemical advantages were still formidable, but they were no match for the metaphysical power of destiny itself. The tide of battle slowly began to turn. Demon's strikes found their marks more often, targeting pressure points and nerve clusters with surgical precision. Marcus's enhanced healing couldn't keep up with the accumulating damage, and for the first time since the fight began, uncertainty crept into his chemical bright eyes. "This isn't possible," he snarled, his massive form wavering slightly. "Nothing beats enhancement. Nothing." "Love does," Demon replied, his voice carrying clearly despite his injuries. "Love and the bond between true mates." He feinted left, then struck right, his fangs finding the major artery in Marcus's throat. This time, when the enhanced wolf tried to break free, Demon held on with the desperate strength of a man fighting for his mate's life. Silver poisoning from Demon's bite began to counteract the chemical enhancement in Marcus's bloodstream. The unnatural size began to diminish, the glowing eyes started to dim, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt genuine fear. "Release me," he gasped, his voice returning to normal as the drugs were neutralized. "I yield. I invoke surrender." But there could be no surrender in a death match. Ancient law was clear. The challenge could only end with one combatant dead. "You had your chance to yield," Demon replied coldly, his grip tightening. "When you chose to enhance yourself with illegal drugs. When you planned to murder innocent children. When you tortured and enslaved the woman I love." Marcus's struggles grew weaker as the silver poisoning spread through his system. The chemicals that had made him nearly invincible were now working against him, making his body hypersensitive to the toxin. "Please," he whispered, all his arrogance and cruelty stripped away by impending death. "I'll leave. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." "No," Serafina said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "There can be no mercy for monsters who prey on children. No forgiveness for slavers and murderers." Her words sealed Marcus's fate. Demon's jaws closed with final force, and the enhanced wolf's struggles ceased forever. But victory came at a terrible cost. As Marcus's body went limp, Demon collapsed beside it, his own injuries finally overwhelming him. The mate bond that had given him strength during the fight now carried a different message. He was dying, his life force ebbing away like water through cupped hands. "Demon!" Seraphina fought against her chains with renewed desperation as Captain Thorn limped forward to unlock them. The moment she was free, she ran to where he lay bleeding on the ancient stones. His human form had returned with unconsciousness, and she could see the full extent of his injuries. Broken ribs, punctured lung, massive blood loss from dozens of wounds. Even with werewolf healing, the damage was too severe. She gathered him into her arms, cradling his head against her chest as his labored breathing grew shallower. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered fiercely. "Not now. Not after everything we've been through." His silver eyes opened with tremendous effort, focusing on her face with the last of his strength. "Seraphina," he whispered. Are the children?" "We're safe," she assured him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "All of us, thanks to you. But I need you to stay. I need you to fight." "Can't," he managed to say. "Too much damage. But at least you're free now." The mate bond between them pulsed with his fading life force, and Seraphina felt a desperate idea take shape. If the bond could share strength during battle, perhaps it could share life itself. She looked up at the lightning sky, addressing the moon goddess who watched over all werewolves. "Take me instead," she pleaded aloud. "He's a king, a leader, someone the world needs. I'm nobody special. Take my life and let him live." The ancient magic stirred again, responding to a prayer offered with perfect selflessness. The mate bond between them blazed brighter than the rising sun, and Seraphina felt her life force beginning to flow into Demon's failing body. But the moon goddess had different plans. Instead of accepting the trade, the divine power completed what Seraphina and Demon had begun. The true mate bond, forged in love and sealed with sacrifice. The spiritual connection between them became something greater than the sum of its parts, a fusion of souls that transcended death itself. Power flowed both ways through the completed bond. Seraphina's determination and fierce love merged with Demon's strength and protective instincts, creating something that was neither purely his nor purely hers, but entirely theirs. The wounds on his body began to close, not through werewolf healing, but through the power of their completed mate bond. Broken bones knitted together, torn flesh regrew, and the life force that had been fading grew strong again. When Demon's eyes opened fully, they held a silver fire that hadn't been there before. The reflection of their joined souls, their completed destiny. "Seraphina," he breathed, sitting up to gather her into his arms. "I'm here," she whispered back, feeling the echo of his heartbeat in her own chest. "We're here. Together." The mate bond hummed between them, perfect and complete at last. No law could separate them now, no contract could bind her to another. They were mated in the truest sense, blessed by the moon goddess herself, and sealed with the ultimate sacrifice, the willingness to die for each other. Around them, the surviving pack members began to kneel in recognition of what they had witnessed. Not just a victory in single combat, but the formation of a true mate bond, something that happened perhaps once in a generation. Captain Thorn, despite his injuries, managed a respectful bow. Your Majesty," he said, addressing them both with the title that Seraphina now rightfully bore as the Alpha King's true mate. In the distance, church bells began to ring, announcing the dawn and the end of the longest night of their lives. Marcus Ravenclaw was dead, his schemes ended forever. Seraphina and her daughters were free, protected not just by royal decree, but by the sacred bond between true mates. And in a tower room high above, 3 little girls were waking up to discover that their mother had found not just freedom, but a father who would love and protect them with his life. The battle was over. Love had won. Chapter 8. 3 months later. The great hall of Castle Blackthorn had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Thousands of white roses cascaded from the vaulted ceiling, their petals scattered across marble floors that gleamed like moonlight. Tall candles flickered in silver holders, casting dancing shadows on tapestries that told stories of legendary loves and triumphant battles. Tonight, they would add a new legend to the collection. Seraphina stood before the full-length mirror in the Queen's chambers, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. Gone was the broken, frightened girl who had once been paraded as Marcus's trophy. In her place stood a queen, radiant in ivory silk that flowed like liquid moonlight, her auburn hair crowned with a circlet of silver and diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. But it was her eyes that showed the greatest transformation. Where once there had been pain and resignation, now there was joy so bright it seemed to illuminate the room itself. The mate bond with Demon had done more than heal her body. It had restored her soul. "Mama, you look like a princess." Arya exclaimed from where she sat on the bed, carefully arranging flower petals in her basket. At 3.5, she took her role as eldest flower girl very seriously, her dark hair gleaming with the same silver circlet that marked her as the future princess she would become. A fairy princess, Lyra added solemnly, her green eyes wide with wonder. The 2-year-old wore a dress of palest pink silk that made her look like a rosebud, and she clutched her flower basket with fierce determination. But it was Luna who made Serafina's heart swell with overwhelming love. The youngest, now 4 months old and thriving under the castle's care, lay contentedly in her ornate bassinet, gurgling happily at the sparkly decorations above her head. She would be carried during the ceremony, a symbol of the family they were cementing with tonight's vows. "The Luna Queen looks radiant," Morrigan observed with satisfaction as she made final adjustments to the wedding gown. The elderly healer had become something of a surrogate grandmother to the girls, and her weathered face glowed with pride. "Though I suspect there's more than just happiness causing that glow." Serafina's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach, where the first flutter of new life had begun to stir. She'd suspected for weeks, but had only confirmed it with Morrigan yesterday. Tonight, after the ceremony, she would tell Demon that their love had already created new life. A son or daughter who would be born of true love rather than obligation. "Is it that obvious?" she asked softly. "To a healer who's been delivering babies for 60 years? "Very much so." Morrigan's smile was gentle. "The king will be over the moon when you tell him." Before Serafina could respond, a knock came at the chamber door. Captain Thorne entered, his arm fully healed now and his formal dress uniform gleaming with ceremonial decorations. "Your Majesty," he said with a respectful bow. "His Majesty sends his regards and wishes you to know that the ceremony will begin at your pleasure. The guests are assembled and eager to witness history." History indeed. In the 3 months since Marcus's death and their mate bond completion, the supernatural world had watched in fascination as the Alpha King courted his chosen queen. Not through political maneuvering or arranged treaties, but with the kind of devoted romance that belonged in storybooks. Demon had spent every day proving his love, not just with grand gestures, but with the small things that mattered more. Reading bedtime stories to her daughters, holding her during the nightmares that still sometimes came, working by her side to establish new laws that would protect vulnerable women throughout their territories. Together, they had revolutionized werewolf society. The old property laws that had allowed Marcus to buy her like livestock were struck down. New protections were put in place for orphaned females and their children. A network of safe houses was established for women fleeing abusive situations, all funded by the royal treasury and overseen by Serafina herself. She had proven herself to be more than just a beautiful queen. She was a leader, an advocate for the voiceless, and a force for positive change that even the most traditional pack elders couldn't ignore. "Tell His Majesty that his bride is ready," Serafina said, lifting Luna from her bassinet while Arya and Lyra gathered their flower baskets. The walk to the Great Hall felt both eternal and instantaneous. Pack members lined the corridors, bowing respectfully as their future queen passed. Many of these same people had once looked at her with pity or disdain, seeing only Marcus's disgraced mate. Now they saw something else entirely, a woman who had survived hell and emerged stronger, a queen who would fight for all of them. The Great Hall fell silent as the massive doors opened. Hundreds of guests rose to their feet. Pack leaders from across the continent, visiting dignitaries from allied supernatural communities, and members of their own pack who had come to witness their king's happiness. But Serafina saw only one person. Demon stood at the altar in formal black and silver, the Alpha King's crown catching the candlelight like a beacon. His silver eyes found hers across the vast space, and the mate bond between them hummed with such joy that she felt tears threaten to spill. He was magnificent, her king. But more than that, he was hers. The man who had risked everything to save her, who had fought a monster to win her freedom, who had shown her daughters what a real father should be. Arya and Lyra preceded her down the aisle, scattering rose petals with the serious concentration of children given an important job. The guests smiled and whispered at their sweetness, but Serafina barely heard them. All her attention was focused on the man waiting for her at the altar. When she finally reached him, Demon stepped forward to take Luna from her arms, cradling the baby with the same gentle strength he'd shown from the beginning. The image of him holding her daughter while waiting to make his vows brought fresh tears to her eyes. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice meant for her alone. "So are you," she replied, meaning every word. Elder Ravenswood, the pack's most senior spiritual leader, stepped forward to begin the ceremony. His voice carried clearly through the hall as he spoke the ancient words that had bound werewolf mates for millennia. We gather under the blessing of the moon goddess to witness the joining of two souls, two hearts, two destinies. Alpha King Demon Blackthorn and Seraphina, daughter of the Mountain Ridge Pack, come before us not as strangers bound by political necessity, but as true mates chosen by fate itself. The formal words continued, but Seraphina found herself lost in Demon's eyes. The mate bond between them pulsed with perfect harmony, two hearts beating as one, two souls that had found their completion in each other. When it came time for vows, Demon spoke first, his voice strong and clear. Seraphina, you came into my life like dawn breaking through the longest night. You taught me that true strength isn't about power or dominance. It's about love, about sacrifice, about standing up for those who cannot stand for themselves. You've made me not just a better king, but a better man. I vow to love you through every sunrise and sunset of our lives, to protect our children with my life, and to build a world worthy of the family we're creating together. Seraphina's voice shook with emotion as she replied, Demon, you saved me in every way a person can be saved. You showed me that love isn't about ownership or control. It's about freedom, about choice, about two people choosing each other every single day. You've given my daughters a father, me a partner, and all of us a future bright with possibility. I vow to stand by your side through whatever comes, to love you with everything I am, and to help you build a kingdom where love conquers all. Elder Ravenswood smiled as he prepared to speak the final binding words. By the power vested in me by the moon goddess herself, and witnessed by this pack and these gathered allies, I pronounce you mated for life. What the goddess has joined, let no one separate. You may kiss your mate, he added with a twinkle in his ancient eyes. The kiss was everything their first stolen kiss had promised, passionate, tender, and filled with the promise of forever. Around them, the great hall erupted in cheers and applause, but they were lost in each other, in the completion of a journey that had begun with blood in the snow and ended with love triumphant. When they finally broke apart, Demon surprised everyone by sinking to one knee in front of Arya and Lyra. Arya, Lyra, he said solemnly, your mother has made me the happiest man in the world by agreeing to be my mate. But I want to ask you both, will you let me be your father? Will you let me love you and protect you and teach you to be the amazing women I know you'll grow up to be? Both little girls nodded enthusiastically, throwing their arms around his neck in a display of affection that brought tears to half the guests' eyes. It was a moment that would be remembered for generations. The Alpha King formally adopting his mate's children not out of obligation, but out of love. As they rose together as a family, Seraphina caught Demon's eye and smiled. Tonight, after the celebration, she would tell him about the new life growing within her. But for now, it was enough to stand beside the man she loved, surrounded by their children and their pack, finally free to love openly and completely. The celebration that followed was legendary. Music filled the great hall as couples danced under the glittering chandeliers. The finest food and wine were served at tables groaning under the weight of the feast. Toasts were made to the royal couple's happiness, to the pack's prosperity, and to the bright future that lay ahead. But the most touching moment came when several women approached Seraphina during the festivities. They were women she had helped through the support network she'd established, former abuse victims who had found safety, healing, and new purpose under her guidance. Your Majesty, one of them said softly, we wanted to thank you, not just for the laws you've changed, but for showing us that our past doesn't define our future. You've proven that a woman can survive anything and still find happiness. You've given us hope, another added. Hope that we can be more than what was done to us. Seraphina felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at these brave women who had found the strength to rebuild their lives. You gave yourselves hope, she replied gently. I just provided a safe place for it to grow. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Demon found Seraphina on the castle's highest balcony, looking out over the moonlit landscape. She stood with Luna in her arms while Arya and Lyra played nearby with some of the packed children, their laughter echoing in the night air. Having second thoughts? He asked teasingly as he wrapped his arms around her from behind. Never, she replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. Though I do have something to tell you. Oh! She turned in his arms, Luna gurgling contentedly between them. In about 7 months, these 3 girls are going to have a little brother or sister. For a moment, Demon was completely still. Then his face lit up with a joy so profound it took her breath away. Are you sure? He whispered. Morgan confirmed it yesterday. I wanted tonight to be perfect before I told you. His kiss was gentle this time, full of wonder and promise. When he pulled back, his silver eyes were bright with unshed tears of happiness. A baby, he said softly. Our baby. A child conceived in love, Serafina agreed. Free from the very beginning. Around them, the night air carried the sounds of their pack settling into peaceful slumber. Their kingdom was at peace, their family was complete and growing, and their love had overcome every obstacle fate had placed in their path. I love you, my queen, Demon whispered against her hair. I love you too, my king, she replied. For always and forever. Above them, the full moon blessed their union with silver light, and in the distance, wolves howled their joy to the stars. It was a sound of celebration, of acceptance, and of hope for the future. The girl who had once been chained and broken was now a queen, surrounded by love and devoted to justice. The king who had once been lonely and duty-bound had found his heart's desire in a woman who challenged him to be better. Together, they had rewritten the rules of their world, proving that love was stronger than law, that hope could triumph over despair, and that sometimes the greatest fairy tales were the ones that began with the darkest nights. Their story would be told for generations, not as a cautionary tale of what could go wrong, but as a testament to what was possible when two people were brave enough to fight for love. And in the castle nursery, 3 little girls slept peacefully, protected by parents who would move heaven and earth to keep them safe, while deep in their mother's womb, a new life stirred, the continuation of a bloodline forged in love and destined for greatness. The dawn of their new love had become the foundation of a dynasty that would endure for centuries, built not on conquest or fear, but on the simple, revolutionary idea that everyone deserved to be loved. Chapter 9. 1 year later. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the royal study, casting golden light across the mahogany desk where Serafina sat reviewing the latest reports from across their territories. Her pregnancy was now showing prominently beneath her flowing emerald gown, and she unconsciously rubbed her rounded belly as she read through the documents that told the story of a kingdom transformed. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she called, setting aside a report on the latest safe house establishment in the Northern Territories. Captain Thorne entered, followed by a nervous-looking young man she didn't immediately recognize. The stranger bore the dusty clothes and weary expression of someone who had traveled far and fast. "Your Majesty," Thorne said with a respectful bow. "This is Garrett Moonstone, formerly of the Mountain Ridge Pack. He has information about your birth family that you requested we investigate." Serafina's heart stopped for a moment. She had asked Demon to look into what had really happened to her original pack, needing closure about the massacre that had left her orphaned and vulnerable to Marcus's predations. But she hadn't expected results so quickly. "Please sit," she said gently, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "What news do you bring?" Garrett perched nervously on the edge of the chair, his hands twisting his travel cap. "Your Majesty, I was part of the Mountain Ridge Pack when the attack happened. I was away on a hunting expedition with several other young males when the rogues struck." "You survived," Serafina breathed, hope and pain warring in her chest. "We all did, the 12 of us who were away. But when we returned," his voice broke slightly. "The pack was gone. Everyone dead or disappeared. We found evidence that some had been taken by slavers, but we were just young males with no alpha to lead us. We didn't know how to track them or who to fight." Serafina leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "Others were taken? Not just me. At least 6 females and several children, based on the tracks we found. But Your Majesty." Garrett's eyes grew bright with excitement. "That's not all. 3 of the females escaped their captors 6 months ago. They're alive, living in a settlement near the western border under assumed names. When word spread about your wedding to the Alpha King, one of them recognized the name Serafina of Mountain Ridge from the royal announcements." The room seemed to spin around her. Family. Real blood family, not just the chosen family she'd built with Demon and her daughters. Women who had survived the same hell she had endured, who might understand her journey in ways no one else could. "Where are they?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Safe, Your Majesty, but afraid to come forward. They've been hiding for so long, they weren't sure if it was really you or if it might be some kind of trap." Garrett reached into his travel pack and pulled out a small, worn piece of cloth. "But they sent this." Serafina took the fabric with trembling hands. It was a piece of her childhood blanket, the one her mother had made for her before the fever took her when Serafina was just 10 years old. She'd thought it was lost forever in the massacre. Cousin Maya saved it when the slavers took her, Garrett explained gently. She's kept it all these years, hoping someday she'd find you again. Maya, her father's brother's daughter, only 2 years older than herself. They'd been as close as sisters before the attack. The knowledge that she was alive, that she had kept a piece of their shared childhood, broke something open in Serafina's chest. Bring them home, she said firmly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Send a full royal escort and bring them home immediately. And Garrett, thank you. You've given me a gift beyond price. After Garrett left to arrange the escort, Serafina sat alone with the piece of fabric, memories flooding back. Her father's laugh, her mother's lullabies, the warmth of a pack that had loved and protected her before violence tore it all away. For the first time since childhood, she felt truly complete, not just as Demon's mate or her daughter's mother, but as herself, with roots that went deeper than survival. 2 hours later, Demon found her still sitting there, the cloth clutched in her hands. Love. He moved to her side immediately, concern creasing his features. Thorn told me about the messenger. Are you all right? I have family, she said wonderingly. Real family. Maya and 2 others from my birth pack. They survived, Demon. They survived, and they're coming home. His arms came around her immediately, holding her as she wept, not from sadness this time, but from overwhelming joy. The mate bond between them thrummed with his happiness for her, his understanding of what this meant. We'll prepare rooms in the family wing, he said against her hair. They'll want for nothing ever again. There's something else, she said, pulling back to look at him. Garrett mentioned that there might be more survivors scattered across the territories. People who went into hiding after escaping various slavers and traffickers. Demon's expression grew thoughtful. We could send out search parties, offer amnesty and protection to anyone from Mountain Ridge who wants to come forward. Yes, but more than that. Serafina's mind was already working, seeing possibilities for healing that extended far beyond her own family. We could create a registry, a way for survivors of pack massacres to find each other, to reconnect with family they thought was lost forever. It was the kind of systemic change that had marked their reign from the beginning, taking personal tragedy and transforming it into hope for others. Demon smiled, the expression filled with pride and love. I'll have the legal scholars draft the framework immediately, he promised. The Lost Wolves Registry, a way to bring families back together. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of small feet running down the corridor, followed by Morrigan's exasperated voice calling after them. Arya and Lyra burst through the study doors, their faces flushed with excitement, and their hair decorated with twigs and leaves. Mama! Papa! Arya exclaimed, using the name she'd naturally adopted for Demon. We found something in the old tower. Something important, Lyra added, bouncing on her toes. Demon raised an eyebrow. Were you supposed to be in the old tower? The girls exchanged guilty looks. Morrigan was teaching us about healing herbs, Arya explained. And we saw something shiny in the window of the locked room. Morrigan appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath and clearly frustrated. I'm sorry, Your Majesties. They slipped away while I was gathering supplies. Little escape artists, these two. What did you find? Serafina asked, curious despite herself. Arya reached into her small pocket and pulled out a tarnished silver locket. This was on the floor by the window. It has pictures inside. Serafina took the locket with growing amazement. It was old, clearly decades past, and when she opened it, her breath caught. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, a man and woman she didn't recognize, but their faces bore an unmistakable resemblance to Demon. These look like... She began. My parents, Demon finished, his voice filled with wonder. He took the locket, studying the portraits with intense concentration. But I've never seen this locket before. All their personal effects were supposed to have been destroyed in the fire that killed them. The old tower had been sealed for years, deemed unsafe after a partial collapse. But if the locket had been there all this time, there might be more, Serafina said gently. More belongings, more memories that survived. Demon's parents had died when he was barely 18, killed in what had been ruled an accidental fire. He'd become Alpha King far younger than anyone expected, with no family left to guide him. It was part of what had made him so lonely, so isolated, until Serafina came into his life. We should have the tower properly searched, he said quietly. If there are other things, I'll arrange it immediately, Captain Thorne said from the doorway, where he'd been waiting patiently for permission to enter. Your Majesty, there's also another matter that requires your attention. The investigation into Marcus Ravenclaw's associates has yielded results. Seraphina felt demon tense beside her. They'd been working for months to uncover the full scope of Marcus's criminal network. The slavers he'd worked with, the officials he'd bribed, the enhancement drug suppliers who'd made his final attack possible. "What have you found?" Demon asked. "We've identified and arrested the remaining members of his trafficking network. 17 people in total, including the slavers who originally took your majesty from the Mountain Ridge massacre site." Thorne's expression was grimly satisfied. "They'll face royal justice for their crimes." "And the enhancement drugs?" Seraphina asked. The illegal chemicals that had made Marcus nearly unstoppable were still a threat if they remained in circulation. "The laboratory has been destroyed, and the chemist responsible has been arrested. We've also identified 3 other packs that were using similar enhancements." Thorne paused. "They've agreed to submit to blood testing and rehabilitation rather than face formal charges." It was another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Marcus's death had been just the beginning. Dismantling the entire network of corruption and cruelty he'd built had taken months of careful investigation. "There's one more thing," Thorne continued. "We found records in Marcus's private study. Financial documents showing payments to officials in multiple territories, including some very highly placed individuals." Demon's expression darkened. "Bribery? And worse. Evidence of a conspiracy to undermine your authority, your majesty. The plan was to use your majesty's obsession with Seraphina to justify a challenge to your rule. If Marcus had succeeded in killing you during the death match, several pack leaders were prepared to support his claim to the throne. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Marcus hadn't just been trying to keep Seraphina. He'd been planning a coup, using their love as the justification for overthrowing the rightful king. "How many were involved?" Seraphina asked, her voice tight with anger. 7 pack leaders, 3 members of the royal council, and a dozen minor officials. They're all in custody now, and their territories are being administered by loyal appointees until permanent replacements can be chosen. "They'll face trial," Demon said firmly. "Full trials with evidence presented publicly. The pack needs to see that such corruption will not be tolerated." It was the kind of decisive action that had marked Demon's reign from the beginning, but tempered now with the wisdom that came from having a true partner. Seraphina's influence had taught him to balance justice with mercy, to seek solutions that healed rather than simply punished. "Speaking of trials," Thorne continued, "there's good news as well. The women we've rescued from various trafficking operations have been making remarkable progress. Dr. Miranda reports that the support programs Your Majesty established are exceeding all expectations." Seraphina felt a warm glow of satisfaction. The network of safe houses and counseling services she'd created had grown into something far larger than she'd originally envisioned. Dozens of women were finding their way back to health and independence, learning to trust again after years of abuse. "I'd like to visit the newest facility next week," she said, "before travel becomes too difficult." She touched her rounded belly meaningfully. "I'll arrange appropriate security," Thorne replied with a small smile. "Though I suspect the women there will provide their own protection. You've become something of a legend among abuse survivors, Your Majesty." After Thorne left to arrange the various tasks they'd discussed, the family spent the afternoon together in the castle gardens. Arya and Lyra played with Luna, who was now crawling with determined enthusiasm and getting into everything she could reach. Demon worked on correspondence while keeping one eye on his daughters, and Seraphina reviewed architectural plans for a new school they were building in the capital. It was domestic and peaceful and perfect, the kind of afternoon she'd never dreamed possible during her darkest days as Marcus's prisoner. "Papa," Arya said suddenly, looking up from where she was showing Luna how to pet a butterfly, "will our baby brother be king someday?" Demon looked up from his letters, smiling. "How do you know it's going to be a brother?" "Luna told me," Arya said matter-of-factly. "Luna can't talk yet, sweetheart," Seraphina pointed out gently. "She talks to me," Arya insisted. "She says the baby is a boy and he's going to be really strong like you, Papa." Lyra nodded solemnly. "She told me too. And she says he's going to help us protect other kids who are scared." Seraphina and Demon exchanged glances. Their daughters had always been perceptive beyond their years, but lately they'd been making comments that suggested an almost supernatural awareness of things they couldn't possibly know. "Well," Demon said carefully, "if the baby is a boy, then yes, he'll likely be king someday. But that's many years away, and there's much for him to learn first." "We'll help teach him," Arya said confidently. about being kind to people who are hurt, and making sure everyone has enough food, and never letting bad people hurt children. The simple wisdom of a 4-year-old child, but it captured everything they'd been working toward. A kingdom built on compassion rather than conquest, where strength was measured by protection rather than domination. As the sun began to set, painting the gardens in shades of gold and rose, Serafina felt a deep sense of completion. Not just because of the baby growing within her, or the family they'd built, but because every loose thread of their story was finally being woven into place. Her birth family was coming home. The criminals who'd destroyed so many lives were facing justice. The corrupt officials who'd plotted against them were removed from power. The women who'd suffered as she had were finding healing and hope. And in the old tower, workers were carefully cataloging the belongings of Demon's parents, giving him back pieces of his own history he'd thought lost forever. "What are you thinking about?" Demon asked softly, settling beside her on the garden bench. "Everything," she replied, leaning into his warmth. "How all the broken pieces are finally fitting together into something beautiful." "No more nightmares?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. The nightmares had plagued her for months after Marcus's death. Dreams of silver chains and chemical-bright eyes, of her daughters being taken while she stood helpless. But they'd been fading gradually, replaced by dreams of light and laughter and endless possibilities. "Not for weeks now," she assured him. I think I'm finally healed. Really, truly healed." The mate bond between them pulsed with contentment, two souls that had found their perfect completion in each other. Around them, their daughters played with the unconscious joy of children who had never known fear, never doubted that they were safe and loved. In the distance, church bells began to ring, marking the hour and calling the pack to evening prayers. It was a sound Serafina had learned to love. Not the harsh clang of alarm or warning, but the gentle chime of a community at peace with itself. "I love you," Demon said suddenly, his voice soft with wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was real. "I love you too," she replied, the words carrying the weight of everything they'd overcome together. Always and forever. Above them, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the castle nursery, their growing son kicked strongly against her ribs as if eager to join the family that waited for him. Their story had begun with blood and virgin snow, with screams and chains and desperate survival. But it was ending, or perhaps beginning again, with love triumphant, justice served, and a future bright with infinite possibility. The broken had been made whole. The lost had been found. And love, as always, had conquered all. Epilogue. 5 years later. The laughter of children echoed through the rose garden of Castle Blackthorn as 4-year-old Prince Alexander chased his older sisters around the fountain, his dark curls bouncing with each determined step. Despite being the youngest, he was already showing signs of the alpha strength he'd inherited from his father, though it was tempered by the gentle compassion he'd learned from his mother. "Alex, you can't catch all of us," 9-year-old Arya called out, her voice bright with mirth as she helped 6-year-old Luna climb onto the fountain's edge. At nearly 10, Arya had grown into a thoughtful, intelligent girl who naturally took charge of her siblings with the kind of protective instincts that would serve her well as a future leader. "Can too," Alex declared with the absolute confidence of a child who had never been told he couldn't do anything. "Mama says I'm getting really fast." Serafina watched from the garden bench where she sat with Maya, her cousin who had become not just family but her closest confidant and advisor. The years had been kind to Maya. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes when she first arrived had been replaced by peace and purpose. She now oversaw the Lost Wolves Registry, helping dozens of families reconnect across the kingdom. "He's going to be a handful when he gets older," Maya observed with fond amusement, watching Alex finally catch Luna in a gentle tackle that dissolved both children into giggles. "He already is," Serafina replied with a laugh, her hand resting on her rounded belly where their second son was due to arrive in just a few weeks. "But he has such a good heart. Yesterday I found him in the kitchens, sneaking extra food to the stable cats because he was worried they looked thin." The past 5 years had been a golden age for their kingdom. The reforms Serafina and Demon had implemented had transformed werewolf society throughout their territories. The network of safe houses had expanded into a comprehensive support system that included job training, counseling, and educational opportunities. The Lost Wolves Registry had reunited over 300 families scattered by various tragedies. Most importantly, a new generation was growing up with different values. Children who were taught that strength meant protecting others, not dominating them. That love was about choice and respect, not ownership and control. "Your Majesty," a gentle voice called from the garden entrance. Serafina turned to see Dr. Miranda approaching with her weekly report. The elderly woman had become the kingdom's Minister of Social Welfare, overseeing all the programs they'd established to help vulnerable populations. "Good afternoon, Dr. Miranda. How are our newest arrivals settling in?" "Wonderfully. The family we rescued from the Eastern Territories last week. The mother says it's the first time in years her children have slept through the night without nightmares." Dr. Miranda's weathered face glowed with satisfaction. "She wanted me to give you this." She handed Serafina a small, carefully folded piece of paper. When opened, it revealed a child's drawing of a castle with a woman wearing a crown, surrounded by hearts and flowers. At the bottom, in careful block letters, was written, "Thank you, Queen Serafina, for saving U.S." Tears pricked Serafina's eyes as she studied the simple artwork. 5 years later, and these moments still moved her deeply. The knowledge that their work was making a real difference in people's lives. "There's something else," Dr. Miranda continued, her voice taking on an excited tone. "The university in the capital wants to establish a scholarship program in your honor. Full education for survivors of trafficking and abuse, with a focus on training future social workers and counselors." "That's wonderful," Serafina breathed. "Education is the key to breaking cycles of violence. The more people we can train to recognize and help abuse victims, the safer everyone becomes," Maya finished, nodding approvingly. "I'll work with them on the application process. Make sure we're reaching the people who need it most." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Demon, still dressed in his formal council robes, but with his sleeves rolled up and his crown slightly askew. Clear signs that he'd abandoned official duties to come play with his children. Alex immediately ran to him, launching himself into his father's arms with complete confidence that he'd be caught. "Papa, I caught Luna and almost caught Arya," Alex announced proudly. "Did you now?" Demon's eyes twinkled with amusement as he settled Alex on his hip. "And did you remember to be gentle?" "Always gentle," Alex recited solemnly, though his grin suggested he'd enjoyed the chase thoroughly. Demon's transformation over the years had been as remarkable as Serafina's. The lonely, duty-bound king had become a devoted father who never missed a bedtime story, a husband who still brought her flowers for no reason other than seeing her smile, and a ruler who governed with both strength and compassion. "How did the council meeting go?" Serafina asked as he settled beside her on the bench, Alex climbing into his lap with the easy affection of a much-loved child. "Productive. The Northern Territories want to implement our education reforms, and the coastal pacts are requesting help establishing their own safe house networks." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "There was also news from the borderlands. Another trafficking ring has been discovered, and the local authorities are asking for our assistance." Serafina felt the familiar fire of determination kindle in her chest. Even after all these years, knowing that people were still suffering, still being bought and sold like property, made her want to fight. "I want to go," she said immediately. "You're 8 months pregnant," Demon pointed out gently, his hand moving to cover hers on her belly. "I know, but—" "Mama," Arya interrupted, appearing at her side with the kind of serious expression that meant she'd been listening to the adult conversation. "You can't go fight bad people when the baby might come. But we can help other ways." At 9 years old, Arya had developed an almost preternatural understanding of the work her parents did. She often helped Maya with the Lost Wolves Registry, writing letters to separated families and organizing care packages for new arrivals. "What do you suggest, sweetheart?" Serafina asked, always willing to hear her eldest daughter's ideas. "We send Captain Thorne and the special team with extra supplies and medicine. And maybe some of the ladies from the support groups who want to help? The ones who know what it's like." It was a remarkably mature suggestion. Several of the women they'd helped over the years had expressed interest in joining rescue operations, feeling that their personal experience could help newly freed victims trust and heal. "That's an excellent idea," Demon said, pride clear in his voice. "Captain Thorne has been training a specialized rescue unit specifically for these situations. And having survivors as part of the team could make all the difference." "See, Mama?" Arya beamed. "You taught us that there's always more than one way to help people." Before Serafina could respond, 7-year-old Lyra came running over, her face flushed with excitement. "Mama! Cousin Maya! The butterflies are back in the rose garden. The special ones." She tugged at Maya's sleeve. "Come see. They're so pretty." Maya allowed herself to be pulled away to admire the butterflies, and Luna went with them, her 9-year-old dignity allowing her to enjoy such simple pleasures. But Arya remained beside the bench, her green eyes thoughtful as she watched her siblings. "Papa," she said quietly, "Alex is going to be special like Luna and me, isn't he?" Demon and Serafina exchanged glances. Over the years, it had become clear that their daughters possessed unusual gifts. Luna seemed to have an empathic connection with both people and animals that went beyond normal sensitivity. Arya showed signs of precognitive abilities, often knowing things before they happened. "What makes you think that, sweetheart?" Serafina asked gently. "I dream about him sometimes. About when he grows up." Arya's voice was matter-of-fact, as if prophetic dreams were perfectly normal. "He's going to help a lot of people. Not just by being king, but by understanding their hearts. Like you do, Mama, but even stronger." Alex looked up from where he'd been playing with the buttons on Demon's robe. "I'm gonna help people," he announced confidently. "Gonna make sure nobody's sad anymore." The simple declaration, spoken with such innocent determination, made Serafina's heart swell with love and pride. This was the legacy they were building. Not just laws and institutions, but children who grew up believing that their purpose was to help others, to make the world better than they found it. "And what about the new baby?" Demon asked Arya, his tone carefully casual. Arya's face lit up with a smile that seemed to glow from within. "He's going to be the bridge," she said mysteriously. "The one who brings everyone together. Wolves and others, all the supernatural people. He'll help them remember that we're all the same inside." It was a remarkably sophisticated concept for a 9-year-old to express, but then, their children had been exposed to complex ideas about justice and equality from birth. They were growing up in a world where difference was celebrated rather than feared. As afternoon faded into evening, the family gathered in the great hall for dinner. The massive table that had once been used for formal state dinners now hosted a different kind of important meeting. A family sharing their day, their dreams, their love for each other. Luna chattered about the new foal in the stables that she was sure was sad because it missed its grandmother. Lyra described in elaborate detail the fairy house she was building in the garden. Alex proclaimed his intention to marry his horse when he grew up because "Princess is the prettiest and nicest girl I know." But it was Arya who provided the evening's most meaningful moment. "Mama," she said as dessert was being served, "do you remember being scared when we were little?" Serafina's hand paused in cutting Alex's cake. "I remember many things about when you were little. What specifically are you thinking about?" "The bad time. Before Papa came to save us." Arya's young face was serious but not sad. "I used to have nightmares about it sometimes. But I don't anymore." "Why do you think that is?" Demon asked gently. "Because I understand now that it made us stronger. Not the bad things, those were just bad. But surviving them, and learning to love afterward, and helping other people do the same." She paused, searching for the right words. "The bad time made us who we are. And who we are helps other people become who they're supposed to be." The wisdom in those words, coming from a child who had been barely 4 years old during their darkest days, took Serafina's breath away. Arya was right. The trauma hadn't been meaningful in itself, but their response to it, their choice to transform pain into purpose, had created something beautiful. "You're going to be an amazing leader someday," Serafina told her daughter, her voice thick with emotion. "We all are," Arya replied confidently. "Because you and Papa taught us that being a leader means taking care of everyone, especially the ones who can't take care of themselves." Later that night, after the children were tucked into bed with their customary stories and songs, Serafina and Demon walked through the castle halls, checking on their domain. The corridors that had once echoed with political intrigue and cold formality now rang with laughter and purposeful activity. They paused in the nursery, where Alex's crib stood ready for its new occupant, and Luna slept peacefully in her bed, clutching the stuffed wolf that had been her comfort object since toddlerhood. "Do you think Arya is right?" Serafina asked softly, her hand resting on her belly. "About the baby being special?" "I think all our children are special," Demon replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "But whether they have supernatural gifts or not, they're growing up with something more valuable. The knowledge that they're loved unconditionally, and the understanding that their purpose is to love others the same way." Serafina leaned back against his solid warmth, feeling the gentle movement of their unborn son responding to his father's voice. In a few weeks, their family would grow again, another child born not from obligation or political necessity, but from pure love. "I never imagined this," she murmured. When I was chained in that snow, bleeding and hopeless, I never dreamed that life could become something so beautiful. The most precious gifts often come from the darkest places, Demon replied, his lips brushing against her hair. Because they teach us to treasure the light. Through the nursery window, moonlight streamed across the peaceful kingdom they had built together. A realm where love conquered fear, where justice protected the vulnerable, where children grew up believing that their dreams could change the world. And in the distance, the sound of wolves howling carried on the night air, not in sorrow or anger, but in joy, celebrating the pack that had found its way home at last. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share, and subscribe for more.